Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have a special guest. She is the author of the book Thoughts of a Warrior, no other than Miss Randy Lee Bauslav. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Randy, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me. Um, I live in Canada. I've got a couple kids, a husband, lots of animals, and I've been writing pretty much my whole life. So that's me in a little
Yes.
nutshell.
Yes, Miss Randy, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. Thank you for sharing your book. And what inspired you to write this book about the thoughts of a warrior?
So this book actually is a sequel to my very first book that I published back in 2017, Thoughts of a Wanderer. And I was inspired because one day I was just in the house doing house stuff. My mom had said something that kind of sparked me to write a poem, and I went, "Oh, you know what? I haven't written a poetry book in a long time. I think that I think it's time to write another one." And that this is what came out of that.
Yes. So, what is the premise of this book?
Yeah, so it's a collection of poetry, and this book, like I said, because it's the sequel. So the first book is poems that I wrote while very depressed. This one
Yes.
is more of a coming out of depression and seeing the good things in life and how life is very up and down and all over. And for every poem, there's a nature picture in it because nature is such a good coping strategy that I wanted to kind of pair them together.
So, Miss Randy, can you read to us one of your favorite poem
I
of
can.
Thoughts of a Warrior?
I can. I have a few that I've got bookmarked, but I'm gonna read the it's actually the very last one in the book.
Yes.
So it's called Shatter the Mirror. I look in the mirror and what do I see? An empty soul staring back at me. That was my life for so very long. There was nowhere to belong. It took me a while to find who I was. What was my life and my because? I wasn't really here, I just subsist. But now I'm happy and I truly exist. Now I look in the mirror and what do I see? A soul full of life stares back at me.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. So, what are your struggles in writing poetry?
With poetry, the biggest struggle is because I really like all of my poems to rhyme. I know you don't have to have them rhyming when you're writing poetry. That's just my thing. I love when they rhyme. So sometimes I'll write something, yeah, and then the next line I can't end it the right way to rhyme, so I have to go back to the line before and change that word just so I can make sure that they do. To me, that's the biggest struggle because I really want them to rhyme.
Yes. So, what inspired you to write poetry?
It's just always kind of been my go-to coping strategy. I started writing poetry probably about 13, 14 years old as just a way to get out of my head. So a lot of people they journal. This is my version of journaling and it just kind of
Mm,
took the form of poetry.
that's be awesome. So, what are the subjects or theme that you like to write about poetry?
They're mostly all an emotion-based poem. They're always sparked from some kind of emotion that I felt in that moment, and then I write it down. So it really comes down to what am I feeling in that moment and how it's gonna come out.
Yes. So, for how many poetry that you put on this book?
I think there's 50 poems in it. I want to say it's a nice short read. I wanted it to be a quick kind of pick me up for people. Yeah, 50 poems. That's what I thought.
That's be awesome. So, this will be the second or second series of your poem. If you
Yeah, it's
compare the first series, what is the big difference?
I would say the big difference is the theming behind it. So the first one is very dark. Like I said, I was very depressed at the time, so it's so very dark. Some of the poetry, the very big emotional turmoil going on in that book. Whereas this one is much more lighthearted, much more seeing the good in life. And I mean, I think for every writer, the more you write, the better you get. So
Yes,
I'm going to just say that it's probably going to be better because I've written a whole bunch of books in between the first one and this one.
definitely. And do you prefer structured forms of poetry or or verse, and why?
Um, I've never I mean, I'm sure there is a type that I use, but I don't tend to think about it before I do it as long as it rhymes. That's the only thing that I care about when I'm putting it in there. So sometimes I'll do like an AABB, or sometimes I'll go the ABAB. Like I don't really care how they rhyme as long as at the end of the poem something is rhyming in it, and I don't care if they are long sentences, short sentences, like they just will flow eventually. I don't put a lot of thought into that part.
So how do you choose the tone of your poem?
I feel like that tone is chosen for me. It's
Mm,
all like I mentioned, it's all an emotion based one. So if I'm feeling really happy, the tone of that poem is going to take on that emotion. If I'm feeling sad, then it takes on a much quieter tone than when I'm rambunctious.
quieter. I like that. And what techniques do you use to make your imagery vivid?
So I mean, in this one particularly, I did match it with a picture from nature, and each picture I chose painstakingly chose actually to make sure that it matched the tone and the theme of each poem. So that way, ideally, you're getting not only the poem, which you could imagine in your mind, but you're getting an imagery with you that is supposed to match the tone level of that poem, whether it's a dark night sky or a bright sunny sky, maybe a bird flying. It all kind of flows together.
So do you revise your poem often, or do you prefer to keep them as initially written?
Well, I do go back and revise, although a lot of times, at least for my poetry, a lot of times I'm pretty satisfied with how it comes out at first because I do really try to get the wording just right on those poems. And sometimes when I'm revising them and I go back, because I'm not in the same emotional state, I'm like, I would change this a lot, but then I'm taking away what it's supposed to be because I'm in a different emotional state. So actually my poetry is often the first second draft. I mean, the first draft is pretty much there for the poem, but I'll go through and maybe revise more the grammar side, even though it doesn't have to be as hardcore as a novel for the grammar.
Yes. So who are your favorite poets and how they influence your style?
I've never thought about it before, to be quite honest. When I was little, I used to always take out the what are they? Shel Silverstein poetry books. I think that's his name. I'd always take those books out of my school library, so that probably played a really big role because I was always taking out that book. And also I have a collection of Winnie the Pooh poems,
Oh
which I
yes.
absolutely love. So I can't think of who wrote them, but that collection of poems really played a really big deal.
Yes. So how do you overcome writer's block when it comes to poetry?
When I'm writing poetry, I don't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write poetry now.
Yes.
That's different than when I'm writing my actual novels. I'll sit down and say, I'm going to just start writing. With my poetry, that comes to me. So because all of my poems are emotional based, if I'm feeling whatever emotion at the time, and certain words are popping into my head because I'm feeling that way, I will then write the poem. So the poem comes to me and then I write it, as opposed to sitting down saying I'm going to write and forcing it out.
Mhm. So how do you balance accessibility with the complexity in your work?
Oh, I'm not sure. You want to say that one again? That's a tricky question.
Yes. So how do you balance your accessibility with complexity in your work?
Hmm. I am
Do you
very.
do you have a techniques in doing it to incorporate them so that when you execute them it flows naturally?
Yeah, I write the way I talk. So
Yes.
I feel like that is across pretty much anything I write, whether it's poetry, whether it's nonfiction. I write the way that I talk. So I make it so you're almost sitting down and having a conversation with me while you're reading the book. That's the vibes that I want to give off. So far, that's what people have been saying, so that's good. And that I think balances these very hard topics with making it an easy read for people is because I'm just, hey, I'm human. Listen to my story.
Yes. Listen to it. And Miss Randy, what would be your advice for those first timer to write poetry?
Write it for yourself, especially when it comes to poetry, because I have such a link between emotions and poetry that if you are trying to write it for someone else, you're not going to have the same impact as if you take what you're feeling and putting that onto paper.
Yes, definitely. And what are your short-term and long-term goals in writing poetry or other forms of maybe sooner or later you will write a novel or memoir?
So I have actually written a couple of memoirs. So from
Wow.
when I wrote my first book, the Thoughts of a Wanderer, one of this. In between, I've written some kids' books. I've written some nonfiction novels and shared my story. So um, that's why this one was really important to get back to poetry because it's been 7, I want to say 7 years in between the two books.
Oh, nice.
So, I mean, my short term goal, I would say, is to promote this book because it only just came out in December. So it's very brand new. So
Brand new.
promoting, yeah, so promoting this one is my short term goal. My long term goal, I'm actually writing my very first suspense novel.
Nice.
So I think it should be fun. I've got a pretty good storyline, I feel like, going on. So that is my long term goal. I'm gonna keep picking away at that book, and it's gonna take me a little longer than my others because it's a different style than I'm used to.
Different genre.
Yeah.
Oh, looking forward for more books, Miss Randy. So, what is your opinion on sharing poems before they are finished?
I've done it. If you're comfortable sharing poems before they're done, then have at her. I would say for me, I'll share them when it comes to poetry. I'll share them at any point. Um, because I write them for myself. If I'm like my suspense novel, that's not getting shared till it is done. But with poetry, because of my connection with the emotional side, and I had mentioned that the first draft is often nearly the final draft for poetry. I'm cool with sharing it whenever.
Mhm. Definitely. So, do you think poetry is better experience aloud or read silently, and why?
Mm. So I'm gonna say it really depends on everyone's learning styles because some people love to listen and some people love to read. And I think
Yes.
it really depends on how that person is best able to visualize what it is the words are trying to show. So I love audiobooks. I also love reading because sometimes the
Yes.
narrators kind of aren't the greatest, but sometimes they're fantastic. So I think if you have the right voice, the right narrator, listening to poetry can be absolutely amazing because you can still visualize it and you can hear the rhythm of how the poem is written because sometimes poems are written with a certain rhythm in mind. But if you don't have that person who can really express what that poem is meaning, reading it might be for the best.
Yes, definitely. So, what role does feedback play in shaping your poems?
Well, I always hope for the best feedback and brace for the worst. But when it comes to poems, again, I'm going to go back to that emotional connection with them. So it's not for everybody. You're
Yes.
never going to please 100% of people. So I take all criticism. Hopefully it's constructive criticism, not just criticism. But I take it all with a little bit of a grain of salt because the person reading it may not be in the same emotional place as when I was writing it. So it might not hit the right spot. But somebody could, especially with poems, you could pick up the same poem a month later and have a completely different reaction to it because you're in a different place. So, whenever you're reading something emotional, I think it really depends on where that reader's mindset is for when they are giving their feedback. I always like feedback. And I'm going to say, readers, if you're giving people feedback, we love it as authors, but just be constructive about it. Be nice because it's hard.
Yes. Be nice, people. And be kind.
Yes.
And Miss Randy, can you again read one of your favorite poem in Thoughts of a Wire?
Yeah. So this one's nice and short. I love it. It's actually paired with a really cool photo that my husband actually took of wolves.
Yes.
And they're like growling at each other. I want that visualization there for it. So it's called Shout It Out. Time to find my voice. Quiet for too long. Thought there was no choice, but that was wrong. Don't need to hide odds to be defied.
Nice. Amazing. That'd be awesome. To sum up our discussion for today, Miss Brandy, how do you feel about publishing or performing your poetry for an audience?
I actually did a couple poems for our local library for we had an author day, so I did share in front of everybody that was there some poetry. So I am always down for that. It's fun, and I love standing up and talking to people. So I'm always good for that.
Yes, that would be awesome. So, Miss Randy, thank you so much for sharing your poetry to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Of course. So all of my stuff can be found on Amazon. You would just pop in my name, Randy Lee Boslaw. And I am on Facebook at RB Writing. My website is rbwriting.ca. And I'm on Instagram and TikTok under Randy Lee Boslaw.
Did I pronounce your last name? My apologies.
No, but you pronounced it the way people are going to need to know it to spell it. So it
Yes,
works.
thank you so much. So, how do I pronounce really? Can you
So,
say it to us?
so it's Bo's Law, but it's spelled
Bows
like Bo's Laugh.
laugh, yes.
Yeah.
So, people, my apologies, Miss Randy.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And please do support Miss Randy because if you support her, more poetry to come. And I'm inviting you to my other podcast, Abstract Poetry. Let's read poetry over there. So, people, more to come. And thank you so much for listening. And please do listen to my feature author of the month of January, best-selling and award-winning author, Mr. Harry Turtledove. See you soon. So, Miss Brandy, I'm looking for my other, I'm looking for a co-host for abstract poetry because you